And greetings, everyone, and welcome to Buzz for Good, where we talk all things nonprofit, the people they serve, and the good they do. And on today's show, I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that all of us are feeling uneasy, unsettled, maybe a little anxious or worse, given what all is happening in our society, country, and world. And all this is on top of the typical drama and conflict that define everyday life. So on today's show, I am buzzing about a nonprofit resource center that provides mediation and restorative justice for individuals, families, neighborhoods, and businesses in the Roanoke Valley, the Bridge Institute. And I hope you will tune in to my conversation with Chelsea Cleary, the Bridge Institute Program Manager, who shares with me the organization's work helping people resolve conflict and create healing. You will learn, as I did, some practical skills that will help you bridge challenging relationships in a world that increasingly seeks to divide us. But first, my name is Michael Hemphill. I'm the creator and host of the TV show Buzz that airs on public television and on our YouTube channel at Buzz for Good, where we feature the great work of nonprofit organizations and the marketing professionals affiliated with the American Advertising Federation of Roanoke, who donate their time and talent helping these life-giving organizations achieve more buzz. And I invite you to join me next Tuesday night, April the 28th at 6 p.m. at the Grandin Theater to preview our newest episode starring On Our Own of the Roanoke Valley, a drop-in center opened 365 days a year for people struggling with mental health and addiction issues. Providing the nonprofit with some much-needed marketing buzz are our good friends from Wheeler Digital. So I hope you will join us. This episode will actually air April the 29th on Blue Ridge PBS. And for those tuning in from my home state of Alabama, I will be in Birmingham next Thursday, April 30th at Red Mountain Theater for a Buzz Live show where I chat with the leaders of 4 nonprofit organizations that we will feature starting May 14th on Alabama Public Television. And you can find out all about this work on our website, buzzforgood.com. That's buzz, B-U-Z-Z, 4, good.com, as well as our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok, all at Buzz for Good. And now, before we begin our conversation, I want to note that the Bridge Institute is not a crisis center. So if you are listening and believe you are in crisis, please call 911. The Bridge Institute, as I learned from my conversation with Chelsea Cleary, is meant to navigate people away from crisis or provide healing after a crisis has occurred. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome here to Buzz for Good, Chelsea Cleary, who is the program manager for the Bridge Institute. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Michael. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I've got to believe that given kind of the tone and tenor of all that's happening in our country over the last several years, that the need for your mediation services has only skyrocketed over the last few years. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're not wrong. I think what we've seen is we've definitely seen some of that undercurrent of folks struggling with, how do we handle disagreements? How do we handle really strong polarization when it happens in communities that are close to us, right? What does it look like when it's happening in our families at the dinner table? What does it look like when we have to have conversations or navigate things that come up when we're having neighborhood disputes, right? So maybe we're having some disagreements about things that need to happen in the neighborhood, but they feel a little heavier and maybe like there's a little more accelerant on it because folks are feeling a little more in their corners politically and really stuck there. So some of the regular conflicts that we see around just being people, managing children, managing family relations, workplace dynamics. We've definitely seen an increase in folks asking for. So we want to be able to manage these and This is also in the waters too. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been definitely a, I would say all times are busy times for conflict because conflict is ever present, but this time
Right.
particularly feels like there's a little extra accelerant on it.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, I know I'm speaking personally here, but like there's just this simmering unease about all that's happening in the world.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that can only resonate or manifest itself in how you then interact with other people who are probably also feeling some just a little more unease or tension or
Mhm.
anxiety or whatever it may be. And that's
Mhm.
where then these things that I don't know, a generation ago may not have erupted into anything, now feel as though they're probably, and social media, I'm sure, has a huge role in all of that, just as far as how we communicate with each other. And, anyway, I just wanted to kind of set the tone because it seems like, from my perspective, the work that you're doing at the Bridge Institute is even more vital today than it was, you know, perhaps 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for that because we feel really similar with that as well.
Yeah.
That's and just to kind of touch on a little bit of what you shared there, Michael. We also notice a trend internally about how conflicts today feel like they're a little bit more complicated than they maybe
Mm.
were like 5, 10 years out, right? Because we notice that family dynamics change, right? We see more blended families, and that's fine.
Hmm.
That's absolutely okay. But there's also some other navigations, right? How do we navigate those complications? Or also just noticing that with social media, I think folks are used to how they speak on social media, right? Maybe that like elevated tone. We sometimes see that creep into the way that folks have communication offline with each other.
Yeah.
Um, and we also notice that some folks just don't want to have any very conflict avoidant. So that's another
Hmm.
trend that we're noticing is that we know that things are out there, we know that things are bothering us, and we know that things are putting some pressure and stress on our relationships. But some folks, especially I would say our younger folks, very conflict avoidant. They would rather not, they'd rather sit in silence and suffer than to bring that conversation forward. So it's interesting to kind of notice these trends, like not only across the years, but also across, different family dynamics or
Hmm.
interpersonal dynamics or even like age generational differences too.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, uh, we'll get to all of those things
Yeah.
later on as well, but I do want to kind of set the stage a little bit more with like, who you are, what the Bridge Institute is. So once again, joined here on Buzz for Good by Chelsea Cleary, who's a program manager for the Bridge Institute, which is a nonprofit community mediation and restorative justice center in Roanoke, Virginia. How'd I do? I took that straight from your website. So is that pretty accurate?
Yeah,
Okay,
that is
good.
absolutely. I hope it's on our website, right? I hope it
Yeah.
is. Yeah,
Uh,
it is. That is
What Well, we've talked about, some of the various conflicts. I know conflict comes in all shapes and sizes. So, kind of describe just, from 20,000 feet the scope of services that the Bridge Institute provides.
Yeah, sure. So kind of thinking, that large, aerial view of the bridge. So our mission is to help people support cooperation, to restore relationships, to prevent violence, and to help people have really important conversations around conflict and to have productive conversations around conflict because
Hmm.
we don't view conflict as something that we need to avoid or something inherently bad. What it is it's an opportunity for change, for growth, and for things to transform. And sometimes those transformations can create much better relationships on the other
Hmm.
side of that.
Yep.
And so the services and the ways that we get there. So looking at the gamut of programming that we have, we do a lot with family services. So what that looks like is we work with getting referrals from local family courts, so juvenile and domestic relation courts throughout the greater Roanoke Valley, as well as into the New River Valley. We also take referrals from people who self-refer, right? They're like, hey, we're having some issues in our co-parenting relationship. We're having maybe some issues as a family dynamic, maybe some parent-teenager relationships feel a little hard.
What? Parent
What?
teenager conflict?
What? How can it be? So sometimes we get folks who are like, we're having some struggle here and we want to talk it through and have a conversation about it. We also work with youth as well. So we're pretty involved with Roanoke City Public School District, and we
Hmm.
do some circle processes, some restorative justice there with the students to help them resolve conflict with each other.
Hmm.
And to also do some of that preventative work too, right? Because when we think about restorative justice and practices, it can seem like we only use that when something has happened, but it's also a tool that we can use to prevent the escalation of disagreements, the escalation of violence, because when people have better relationships with each other, they're less likely, right, to escalate that up, right? Because we
Hmm.
understand that this is a person and we have a different relationship with them.
So
We also
what do you mean by restorative justice in terms of like conflict resolution? Because I have restorative justice more of
Mhm.
along a racial
Yeah.
reconciliation, but do you have a
Mhm.
different meaning for that?
Yeah, so I think that is a very good question. Yeah, so I think the way that we talk about restorative justice in our practice and within our organization is we talk about it as I'm thinking about how the best way I want to say this because like what is restorative justice? Ooh, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ideas on that. But I think the way that we think about it, and I'll speak directly to the way that I think about it,
Hmm.
is I think about setting things right. So when we think about restorative justice, we think about, right, it can absolutely be, right, because there's been a racial harm. And so we need to set that right. And we need to be able to bring parties in who have been affected by the harm and folks who have maybe done the harm and have that conversation to talk about, what did that harm feel like?
Hmm.
What was the outcome of that harm? And what needs to happen in order to make right from that harm? So what does that look like?
So
And that's
it's not just racial in your world.
not just, no,
Okay, okay, gotcha. Okay,
no.
so yeah,
Yeah, it's
that
not
was I
just.
appreciate you clarifying
Yeah.
that. So
No, happy to.
you're basically just saying, someone who has been harmed or feels
Hmm.
he or she has been harmed by
Hmm.
someone else,
Hmm.
that's the opportunity to restore some justice in a relationship, regardless of the,
Hmm.
racial, sexual,
Hmm.
identity, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm. Absolutely. And restorative justice is it's so and I have a deep well and love for restorative justice
Hmm.
because it is both an ancient human tradition, like human cultures and people have been doing this for years and centuries, and it's ingrained in their cultural identities. And it's also really new in our American system. We American system when it comes to, crime and harm, it's very punitive.
Hmm.
And so it's this really interesting holding of like, cultures have been doing this for centuries, right? Indigenous cultures have been doing this for centuries. African cultures have been doing this for centuries. Cultures have been doing this for centuries. Um, but it's really interesting to see how we take this and bring it into the modern context. And it's interesting, right? Especially
Yeah.
when we're kind of going against the grain a little bit, right? Because when we think about harm, we think about punishment. And in restorative justice, there doesn't mean that there's not a consequence, right? But the emphasis is not on the punishment, the emphasis is on the relationship. How
Hmm.
do we address what has happened? And how do we hold the dignity of both people, right? The person who has been harmed and the person who has caused the harm. And how do we help that person who has caused the harm not do it again, right?
Yeah.
And still be able to be a part of the community and still be able to like have relationships with the community. And how do we honor the person who experienced the harm and get them what they need to feel like they can still be part of the community and to feel like, okay, this harm has been addressed, what has been wronged has now been set right, and it's an opportunity to prevent future instances of harm.
Hmm. So you were talking about how you get your, I guess, your intake or your, people who come to you like from the school
Hmm.
system, from the court
Hmm.
system, navigating family dynamics,
Hmm.
student on student issues, et cetera.
Hmm.
How else do you like? Are you always looking at individuals, or are you also looking at, different groups or organizations and kind of conflict resolution amongst them? You mentioned neighborhoods or
Yeah.
like or companies, or
Mhm.
what does that look like?
All of the above, everything that you just shared.
Okay.
It's all of the above. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get intake. So I think it's helpful to maybe do some table setting when it comes to services. So I talked a lot about restorative justice, and that's definitely a process that we can offer to folks that we can do, interpersonally, like with a small, two folks, maybe like a couple folks up to a group. But we can also do things around mediation, which is a little bit different than restorative justice,
Hmm.
as well as doing that larger group conferencing. So thinking about neighborhoods or communities, um, and being able to have those kind of larger group discussions as well. The mediations we do a lot with the court system, both with family, so juvenile and domestic relation, as well as general district court as well. So when we think about, landlord tenant issues or
Mm.
contracts between business partners that feel like, okay, something has happened and now we have to have a discussion about this. We can be a referral from the court system to have that mediated conversation with us at no additional cost, especially if it's coming through the court system. So yeah, we run the whole gambit. We also have a program as well where it's not just a program that we run; it's across the state. It's from a Department of Justice grant that we got across the Commonwealth of Virginia for community mediation centers to
Mm.
work with building relationships with local law enforcement agencies to take some referral cases from them for folks who maybe are having a civil conflict, not a criminal conflict. Perhaps it's folks who have been arguing, neighbors who have been arguing for 20 years, and they call the police, every couple of weeks to let them know what's going on. And so we are working on building those relationships to say, hey, you know what? What if they called us and we got an opportunity to offer some of our services to them for free, to see if we can help them solve that issue.
Hmm. Lovely. Well, once again, joined here on Bus for Good by Chelsea Cleary, who is a program manager for the Bridge Institute, which is a nonprofit community mediation and restorative justice center in Roanoke, Virginia. Um, Thank you for sharing kind of all the range of services you provide and like how
Mhm.
you receive that. I assume like if perhaps if I am feeling some conflict with somebody, I could just call you up as well and get some get some, I don't know, some services.
Yeah, so absolutely. We have a free intake process where we can, talk with folks to talk through what their situation is,
Hmm.
what are some of the elements of the conflict, who they're having the conflict with, and give them the opportunity to look at some of the options we have available to them to help them with that conflict.
Okay.
So they can make the decision. I think that's a really important part of our services too, is that sometimes, man, I wish there was like a Law and Order for mediation, like a drama that depicted, or not a
Yeah.
drama, but something that depicted what mediation looks like. Because
Yeah, but that that
we,
that doesn't sell. Conflict sells. Yeah,
I
we
know
no,
the
no
resolution.
resolution is fine, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, we can wish, right? Because I think sometimes folks have in their minds, right, when I come to mediation, the mediator is going to listen to the strength of my case against this individual, and then they're going to listen to the strength of the case against me, and then the mediator is going to make the decision for us. And that is absolutely not what the process looks like.
Right.
My role, mediators' roles, our roles are not to tell people what to do. We're not there to make a decision. We're not there to make an influence on the outcome. We're really just there to support people in a process of listening to one another, maybe asking some questions, maybe raising some things up to bring some more attention to have the parties discuss.
Hmm.
But everything else, the resolution, the conversation, what does the future look like for these folks? That's up to them.
That's got to be
And
tough, though. I mean, because you're also a person. I imagine that's where all the training comes in. Because it's sometimes I'm sure you're looking at one party and thinking, "Come on, dude, get it together," but you can't really say that
there's
because you've got to
definitely,
maintain some impartiality.
yeah, there's definitely been some times where I'll work with clients and I'm like, oh, I see the answer. Or I see, okay, I don't see the answer. I
Yeah,
see a possible answer
yeah,
that could maybe alleviate a lot of tension in the situation. But it's not my place to bring it up, you
right.
know? We can ask thoughtful questions about, okay, so if so and so does this and so does that, but what happens when your work changes? How is this going to work?
Hmm.
How are you going to be able to do this, or
Hmm.
have you thought about, right? Or, oh, here's something interesting, right? You said this. Like, let's talk a little bit more about that. So we can guide folks a little bit, but really
Yeah.
it's tough. And that's where a lot of the training comes in, right? Is listening more than we're
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah. Because I think it's a human instinct to just want to fix the situation, and by
Mhm.
fixing it from a third party perspective, you want to say, "Hey,
Mhm.
you're doing this wrong, and you could do this better," and
Mhm.
and just do it rather than, but that may make them feel defensive and not get to the resolution that you're trying to get to. So,
And it might not actually be as beneficial because what I've learned in my practice in doing this is that the issue that folks come to see me about is not the only issue that's there,
mm, mm,
right? Like that's if we think about an iceberg, like that's the tip of the iceberg, what they're actually coming to talk about. What's underneath that is a lot of other
yeah.
stuff that has probably happened in their relationships or things that have gone unspoken but need to have room to be spoken.
Or
And
the
so when
models that they learned from their
Mhm,
parents and who learned
mhm.
it from their grandparents. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
generational aspect to all this as well that
Mhm.
you're not only dealing with what's happened over the last 6 months, but you're dealing with what someone has learned, from 50 years earlier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we do have when we see clients from all age ranges. We see all kinds of folks and we see folks who have been married to each other for 30, 40, 50 plus years, who have to talk through some things. And so
Yeah.
there's like 30, 40, 50 years of things that need to be said. And so when we as mediators are just listening and having parties talk through things, letting them sit in that struggle can
Hmm.
be really profound to be
Hmm.
able to really hear things in a different way from each other. Like that's something we hear pretty commonly after a session is folks will be like, I've been saying this to you for 10 plus years and now you hear it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
sometimes the context we hear it different in different contexts,
Yeah.
right? But at least it's finally been heard.
Yeah. Is there a common thread? I mean, I know you're dealing with a variety of different conflicts,
Mhm.
marriages, parenting, kids,
Mhm.
neighborhoods, companies, contractors. But is there a common thread that runs through all these various conflicts?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I notice a lot is that it's some common threads that I see are really unmet needs. Like that
Mm,
is no matter what conflict we're supporting the resolution of or the conversation around, um, people have some unmet needs that are just sometimes they're not aware that it was an unmet need, and
hmm.
sometimes they haven't been able to find the right words to say, actually, no, this is what I needed. Um, I've also noticed a common thread of where people will sometimes take things that another person says as an accusation against them
Yep.
And so we really try to coach folks, um, sometimes in the pre-work before they come to see us, or, gently during sessions, we'll, just kind of share sometimes like, hey, it can be helpful when someone's bringing something up to hold it as information,
Hmm.
right? This is just information. This is not an accusation against you. This is not, critique of you as a person. This is just information. So, what would it feel like to hold this as information and to think about this as information about where another person might be having a perspective and how is that right? So, getting people to reframe how they're
Hmm.
thinking about the conflict. Because especially depending on what people's relationships are with each other, it can be hard to not take things personally or not feel like there's an accusation there, regardless if it's your business partner, if it's your romantic partner, if it's your maybe teen child
Hmm.
sharing some information, right, about how something is not meeting a need that they have, or how perhaps an action or a behavior or a comment landed for them.
Hmm.
And so that's something that I notice a lot is helping to support people of like, hey, easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But holding that information, right? Holding someone sharing like, I'm feeling this way, or like this isn't happening. It's like, okay, this is information. This is a need that you have.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
let's talk about it.
And be completely transparent here. And I've been on my own kind of counseling, but you'll put therapy that may be too, I don't know, but loaded of a term. But my own journey and having learned that communication is hard. I
Yes.
mean, it's because it's so much more than just the words coming out of your mouth, which I
Mhm.
didn't fully appreciate. So it's not only what I'm saying, which I may think is you know, uh, purely information, but someone else is hearing it with completely different ears based on my tone, my body language. Like the actual words are just a small fraction of what is actually being communicated, and
Yeah.
that's a challenge. Which I
It's a
imagine you.
huge,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Oh, sorry. I don't, I'm just so excited. I feel like I keep cutting you off, Michael. I'm
No, no, no,
sorry. I just
no,
get,
no.
I
I'm
get so
cutting you off.
excited
You're
talking
you're
about
the
it.
you're the guest here, so it's your show.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you really brought up such an insightful point, and something that is absolutely true, right? Communication is hard,
Mhm.
and we do ourselves a disservice in a lot of ways by not having more opportunities to grow those skills because they're so important. I
Yeah.
think so about so many conflicts, big, small, small, big, big, small, micro, macro, international. A lot of it comes down to how good can we communicate, and how well can we listen too. I think those two things go really hand in hand with each other,
Mhm.
is being able to do those things. And I know for us, that's always something, that we're constantly, working on in ourselves, right? So we can be better and better at supporting folks with their conflict resolution, and, you know, figuring out, okay, what do we do now in this conflict, and how do we move forward? But also, we look at our mediations, our facilitations, our restorative justice conversations as violence prevention in and of themselves,
Mhm.
because if we can help support people going through a process and doing things differently in conflict, being able to listen to each other, being able to hold, not as accusations, but as information, and being able to see that, oh, we can do this, right? These are really hard topics that have some pretty heavy emotional weight behind them for both of us. But if we can do this, we can probably do this in other arenas
Mhm.
of our lives too. And so we see this as we see every mediation as an opportunity to give those skills and give folks the opportunity to work those skills and hopefully take those out into like other conversations or other conflicts that they might have outside of our office.
Yeah. Lovely, lovely. I will. We are going to take a break here in our conversation with Chelsea Cleary, Program Manager of the Bridge Institute. And when we come back, I'm going to ask her most satisfying cases that she has worked with the nonprofit Community Mediation Center, and if she's willing to share perhaps her most dissatisfying story so far from one of her cases. So we'll be right back on Buzz for Good. And you are listening to Buzz for Good. Find out more about our work through my website, buzzforgood.com, BUZZ4good.com, as well as our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok, all at Buzz for Good, where we feature the great work that nonprofit organizations do and the marketing professionals who donate their time and talent helping these organizations achieve more buzz. And once again, we have a watch party in Roanoke at the Grandin Theater on April the 28th at 6 p.m., where we preview our newest episode starring On Our Own of the Roanoke Valley, a drop-in center open 365 days a year for people struggling with mental health and addiction issues. And here is a promotional video about that episode. Life can be hard, especially if you've suffered abuse from a parent or spouse, trauma from military service, sexual assault, or bipolar disorder. You cope with drugs and alcohol because, quite simply, you feel you're on your own. But that's not the case, at least in Roanoke, Virginia, where a nonprofit 365 days a year is dedicated to ensuring you are not on your own. And making sure this organization isn't on its own, marketing-wise, are our good friends from Wheeler Digital, who returned to our show to provide today's nonprofit star with some much-needed buzz.
So I'm Robin Hubert. I'm the Executive Director of On Our Own of Roanoke Valley. We are a center for folks who are seeking recovery from mental health and substance use challenges. There's no application to come in. It's just you walk in. There's no requirement for coming to the center. You don't have to make an appointment. And so 365 days a year, we are here every afternoon, 7 days a week, for people that come in and are seeking recovery. And the beautiful thing about us is it's peer support. Because everyone else is in long-term recovery that works here, you can connect in a way that is very heart-to-heart.
Robin Hubert has battled a lifetime of depression and pain and knows the path of the peer. She says when her stepfather began abusing her mother, she would hide her sister behind her bedroom dresser to shield her from the violence. At 11 years old, she got her first taste of alcohol, which numbed her pain. 19 years later, 19 years of alcohol abuse and multiple hospitalizations for major depressive disorder. In the year 2000, she checked into rehab where she spent not only her 30th birthday, but her son's 4th. While she began a new life of sobriety, a marriage to an abusive husband herself planted the seeds of substance abuse in her own children. Following a car accident, her son also became addicted to prescription OxyContin. He eventually got sober, she says, but after a visit with his ailing father, from whom Robin had long since separated, he relapsed, took one more dose, and died.
So that experience, which is going to be 15 years this year that he's gone, it was very obviously difficult losing a child. And I am sure that he's in heaven. I'm sure because of my faith and his faith that he's with Jesus in heaven. I did not have to pick up a drink because of the support I had with my church family, my AA family, and just my friends who just surrounded me and held me up. So that is a huge thing, because when you've had a lifetime of depending on a painkiller, and alcohol is a painkiller, it was for me, to want to turn to that is very natural.
So I do hope you will join us Tuesday night, April 28th at Grandin Theater for our preview party featuring On Our Own of the Roanoke Valley. The episode airs Wednesday night, April 29th on Blue Ridge PBS. And then on April 30th in Birmingham, Alabama, we will be hosting a Buzz Live show at Red Mountain Theater, where I chat with the leaders of 4 nonprofit organizations that we will feature on Alabama Public Television in May. But for now, back to my conversation with Chelsea Cleary, Program Manager of the Bridge Institute. All right, and we are back here on Buzz for Good with my guest today, Chelsea Cleary, who is the Program Manager for the Bridge Institute, a nonprofit community mediation and restorative justice center in Roanoke, Virginia. And before the break, I said that I was going to ask you about the most satisfying case that you have worked so far for the Bridge Institute.
Yeah, I have so many cases that kind of come to mind, but one of them has to do with a session for a family we were working with. And it was two parents. So mom and dad were coming in to talk about, what does our parenting plan look like? And mom and dad had new romantic partners, as a lot of times, just happens. It's part of life. People, move on, find new partners, develop new relationships. And so that can also be a source of conflict as well. And
Sure.
so
For
mom and
everybody.
new girl for everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's a transition. It's a transition, and
Mm-hmm.
it just is. And so mom and new girlfriend had some conflict with each other. There had been some words exchanged. There had been maybe some not so kind words exchanged to one another. Um, and as we were working through the parenting plan with these parents, something kept coming up for mom, where mom felt it was really important for the parenting plan to move forward. New girlfriend owed mom an apology. And that came up a couple times. So as we were
Mm.
working through, what they needed to talk about with each other, some needs that needed to be met in this new parenting plan, apology from new girlfriend kept coming up. And so I just kind of paused for a second and just acknowledged it. I said, "Hey, I'm noticing that this apology is really important to you." And I hear that. And what I'm curious about is, what about this apology is really important to you, right? Opening that space for mom to just say, like, right, because it's not just about the apology. What's underneath that?
Mm-hmm.
And mom shared, "I'm afraid that because your girlfriend doesn't have easy access to me, she might be still angry, right? She might still have some negative feelings about me, mom. And if she can't get to me, is she going to take it out on the children that we have?"
Mm.
When mom said that, the tone of the conversation completely changed.
Mm.
Completely changed, right? Because now
Now,
it's
is
not,
everybody in the room together when you're with this? Oh,
no,
this is just you and mom,
this is just the
the
parents
parent.
and us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay.
we generally don't have, because it's not children's business, right? What their
No,
parents are
no,
going to be
yeah,
talking about. Yeah.
no, I didn't know, but if this was also girlfriend in the room as well.
No.
No, just
No,
mom. And
girlfriend wasn't there. Yeah.
okay,
Boyfriend, girlfriend of the parents. Nope. It's just mom and dad. It's just
gotcha,
the two of them.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um, right. And we can't, right? I can't make girlfriend give an apology, right?
right.
And I have no
And
authority
what's
to
the
do
big deal?
that.
It's so easy to apologize to people. I mean, we love apologizing for the mistakes that we have made, and I'm being facetious
Yeah.
because no one likes to
No
apologize.
one likes to
Yeah,
apologize. Yeah, yeah, it can be. Yeah, it's a practice, right? Just like good
yeah.
communication, good apology is practice, right? But we yeah, so it's just mom and dad, right? But
You
but
said the
dad
whole
got
conversation changed once she
the
raised that
whole
issue. Yeah.
conversation changed. Yeah, because they were both kind of, the what I was picking up on was, it felt like mom and dad were both felt like mom and dad were both kind of cold and annoyed with each other, which is fair, which is valid, right? Like it's totally okay to have those feelings with each other. And I'm sure there were tons of reasons why they were coming in with those emotions and those feelings and those behaviors with each other. Um, but I noticed them lean in. I
Mm.
noticed their body posture change. And when dad heard that, dad was like, oh, okay, the mother of my children is not just being like a jerk about this, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
reason that this feels important. And so dad was able to speak to that need, right? Of like, hey, I'm not going to allow that to happen. Dad was like giving that reassurance, like now that I'm aware of this,
Hmm.
oh, I'm going to be really like kind of mindful and looking for that. And I know that like my partner, my new girlfriend, doesn't have that kind of relationship with our children, right? So now mom gets some reassurance that like, oh no, like my new girl, that dad's new girlfriend has a good relationship with our children, right? And
Hmm.
like knows not to take out whatever feelings she might have right here. But mom needed that reassurance.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like a moment that really stood out to me because it's like, wow, this is the importance of
Hmm.
being able to ask, what is that apology? What is that apology going to offer to this co-parenting relationship? And so, I don't know if new girlfriend ever gave an apology. I don't know if that
Yeah.
ever happened, but it sounded like in that moment, right? The need was uncovered. And so some reassurance could be given. And also, dad's kind of aware. Maybe
Yeah.
dad can talk about that with his girlfriend and just
Yeah.
say, hey, this, feels like something. If you want to do this apology, you can. And if not, just, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
There's peace once more in the family
Hmm.
dynamic.
Hmm. And I know that the personal satisfaction is not the driving motivation here, but I mean, I'm hearing that, and I'm hearing that perhaps that would not have happened had you not been listening to what she was saying and then asking the right question at the right time. So,
Yeah.
brava, brava.
Oh, sometimes things just
Yeah,
align,
yeah,
sometimes things just align, which
yeah.
is which is great.
So now on the flip side, and I want names here. No, I'm kidding.
You want names and
But
addresses?
yeah, right. But is there one particular moment in your work that has been either dissatisfying or regretful? It's like, oh, I wish that we could have achieved a different resolution in all this.
Yeah, I think I was, I'm thinking of when we were on the break, I was thinking about that question because
Mhm.
I was like, do I have like a particular case that I can think of?
And I'm asking,
And
I'm asking not for, scintillating purposes, but more like,
of course,
what are the lessons that perhaps you have learned or that listeners can learn from in this situation?
yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I have some lessons. Yeah,
Mhm.
so maybe perhaps that's what I have. I have some lessons learned from cases that I have left feeling dissatisfied.
Okay.
Um, and I think some lessons that I have learned is one of them. So I still consider myself a baby mediator because I work with some folks who have been doing it for like a decade plus.
Hmm.
And I'm not quite at a decade plus. But some of the things that I've learned throughout this facilitator and mediator journey is that shutting down conflict too early can be really detrimental. So, what
Hmm.
I mean by that is that there's been times in a session where folks perhaps are, maybe they're starting to raise their voices a little bit. Maybe they're starting to speak more honestly about what it is that they're feeling, about
Mm.
what it is that's bothering them, about the issues that they want to have addressed, right? So maybe people are starting to kind of like
Yeah. That's
speak a little
that's
bit faster,
that's turning up the volume. Right.
right? The volume's maybe turning up a little bit.
Yeah.
And, we don't let people, max out on the volume, right? Because we want to make sure people stay safe.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is that when I've tried to like kind of like turn the volume off and be like, let's take a pause, let's like, you know, dampen this moment, I actually interrupted a process
Mhm.
and I interrupted a flow of where maybe folks were just about to be like, you know what? This is what I'm really frustrated
Yeah.
about. And that I'm really frustrated about this is like, hey, this is like the
Now we
end,
can,
right? This is,
yeah.
yeah, now we can. It's like, oh, okay, right. Kind of had to do this like spiral and we had to move in that way. And so I've noticed that when I've, right, cut the volume all the way down, pulled the aux out, like that I missed an opportunity to
Yeah.
let another person really get a chance to reflect or say what they needed to say. Um, Another lesson learned too is you can't push people. You can't push people to be ready before they're ready.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know, sometimes that's and I'm thinking about just in my own, right? Because when people know you're a mediator, you kind of become the de facto
Right.
conflict person,
Sure.
even in your own personal life. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's something that I can take a lesson learned from my own personal life, right? Because these
Hmm.
skills don't, I don't leave these at the office.
Probably puts a little
Um,
pressure on you because you've always got to behave, you know?
yeah, yeah. We've had some good conversations in our family too of like, I am still learning. I am not the guru. I do not know all. Chelsea's human and fallible.
Right, right, right.
Chelsea still has a lot of growth to do,
Yeah, yeah.
like all of us. But yeah, I think something too can feel, we can't push people to be ready before they're ready.
Hmm.
We might feel like I have the answer. I know how to get this done. I know how to do things. And I've noticed that too with some of our clients that will come in is that they'll just be like to the other person that they're, mediating with or having a session with is like, why can't you just get here? You need to get here. And that can really, dampen the process
Yeah.
because instead of people wanting to move forward, right? It's like they're not there yet.
Hmm.
We might be like, hey, how come you can't meet me here? And what we're not seeing is like their path's a little bit more winding, a little bit more treacherous before they can get there. There might be a couple other things that they have to work out before they're ready to come to the table. And that can feel kind of frustrating, right? Because you're like, oh, this could be great. We could really make some progress here. But part of that is the patience and
Hmm.
recognizing that, right? And mediation, restorative justice, conflict resolution, we let people make their own decisions, right? People tell us where they are and what they're willing, ready, and able to do.
Hmm.
And so that can be really hard is when you're like, I know you can get here, but it just takes a little bit of patience. It doesn't mean that people won't get there. I've had clients before where folks have said no to mediation, right? And mediation is a voluntary process, and we can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. And so when the opportunity was offered at first, they said no. They weren't ready for it. But we waited, right? The seed had been planted. So 6 months out, 3 months out, excuse me, that's my alarm. 6 months out, 3 months out from that, um, something changed.
Hmm.
And they were like, you know what? I'm ready to do this. I'm in a place where I'm ready now to do this. And so that can be another lesson learned is, right, give people like plant the seed, but like be patient to let it grow.
Mm. Yeah.
Be patient to let it grow.
Yeah. Well, again, joined here on Buzz for Good by Chelsea Cleary, Program Manager of the Bridge Institute, a nonprofit community mediation and restorative justice center in Roanoke, Virginia. And you started talking a little bit more about your personal life as far as,
Mhm.
the journey that you've been on. And I'm just curious, like what led you to this space of, wanting to work in conflict resolution?
Yeah, that is a journey in and of itself. Yeah, so kind of what brought me into this. So growing up, I grew up in a house where my parents had been happily divorced for 30 years. So I grew up in a house with my mom primarily, and my mom
You don't hear
worked
that term every day. Happily divorced for 30
they're
years.
happily divorced. Yeah, it took them some time to get there, but
Okay.
but they got there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, they got there. But so with my mom, she worked for. So I am an Appalachian girly, but I'm originally from Northern Appalachia in upstate New York. So I was born and raised in upstate New York.
Okay.
And my mom she worked for the Department of Social Services in our
Hmm.
in our local area, and so she worked a couple different gigs within the Department of Social Services. So she had done child protective service. She had done some direct case management for folks. She had just done some, helping people with getting access to employment, getting access to, medical care, housing, name it. She did it. And so growing up, I didn't know the specifics, but I was aware that not everybody had the same access to all of those things, and not everybody went home to a safe home. So I kind of like knew that in the back of my mind. And and when I was going through, growing up and going into college, violence prevention and mitigation had always been a really important part of my work. And so I
Hmm.
kind of have always followed that thread. And that thread brought me actually to Virginia Tech, where I was the inaugural sexual violence prevention specialist. Um, when I was down, that's what brought me to Virginia was that
Okay.
amazing opportunity to work with Virginia Tech. And
Yeah.
so all along that line, I had been exposed to restorative justice. I credit that with my dear friend Larry Parham, who is no longer with us, but to me feels like I stand on his shoulders because he was a giant in advocating for that where I grew up in New York. And so I just remember being in the auditorium, learning about restorative justice as a way for students in the school to be able to stay in school because our local schools had a disciplinary problem where we were expelling a lot of kids, particularly along racial lines. So our Black students, particularly our Black male students with disabilities, were being suspended at disproportionate rates.
Yeah.
And so Larry was working really hard with the school and with the community and parents to talk about, hey, there's another path forward, and it's called restorative justice. And so that seed got planted. And so throughout my work with Virginia Tech, in my role, that seed started to grow a little bit more about, what does that look like? What does it look like to prevent violence by ensuring that if violence happens, it doesn't happen again?
Hmm.
What does that look like to really invest in relationships and supporting people and making really good relationships with each other? What does that look like when we talk about violence prevention? And what does it mean to really think about the dignity of all people, right? Even the people we don't like. What does it really mean to see people as being whole people who are worthy of dignity? And how can that help us with restoring and repairing and preventing harm? And then I had a personal tragedy happen in August of 2024. So in August of 2024, my uncle Scott, he was 63 years old, he was murdered
Hmm.
by a family friend. His name was Matt. And Matt was 38 years old. So he's only a couple of years older than me. I knew Matt. I grew up with Matt. My uncle Scott had been the family babysitter for Matt and his siblings. And we tragically lost Matt as well. Matt took his life as well.
Hmm.
And so it felt so devastating to know that prior to this murder suicide, Matt had been struggling. Matt had been struggling with some mental health stuff. There was actually a 911 call that my uncle Scott had made 5 days before this tragedy, and he shared with not only the state troopers but also with some of his friends at there's a local bar around the corner that he hung out at quite a bit with his friends. Was the neighborhood spot people gathered, and he had shared about how Matt had said, "I'm going to kill you, Scott, kill the dog, and kill myself." And so that experience just, before everything kind of felt like theoretical, it happened to somebody else.
Yeah.
But then this happened in our family, and it felt so important to me to not only honor my Uncle Scott, but to also honor Matt, because I knew Matt and I know his family, and I know that there's people that love and care about Matt too. And this felt like a tragedy all the way around.
Yeah.
And so sitting in that seat, sitting in that place, I felt like, okay, some things are coming into view now about where I want my life's work to move. And so I was kind of already aware of the Bridge Institute. I had done some restorative practices, work, like professional development work. They came to Virginia Tech and did some stuff. And when the opportunity arose to come onto the team as a program manager, specifically working on the police referred mediation program and then growing from there, I was like, yeah, this is where I'm meant to be, and this is where I want to be.
We are coming to an end to our conversation with Chelsea Cleary, program manager of the Bridge Institute. The final question that I was hopeful that you could perhaps provide some based on your own personal tragedy and story, but also those of the the people that you treat or help on a daily basis. Is there one piece of advice that you can give maybe someone who is on the verge of needing your services to perhaps go a different direction? Like, is there something that, someone is listening to this conversation right now, or like, I need to give them a call because I'm really having problems with, X, Y, or Z. Is there something that perhaps that you might suggest that they could do before needing to come to you?
Yeah, I think so I would highlight, there's never too early a time to intervene if something feels like, ooh, maybe I'm noticing this dynamic. Just, there's an opportunity to acknowledge it and to chat about it. I think a lot of, I think a lot of opportunities arise when we get curious about conflict, right? So if like there's something happening or a dynamic that's occurring, it's never too early to just pause and be like, hey, you know what? I noticed that there's some friction here. I noticed that there's some energy that I don't feel super comfortable with, or I noticed that there's some distance in our relationship. Do you want to just have coffee and talk about it? Or something too, just to highlight is that conflict is really natural and normal. And I think that people carry a lot of shame in their, experiencing conflict. And I think that as a culture, we don't do a really good job of honoring the fact that we don't really do a good job of honoring the fact that conflict is just really a normal part of life, and that conflict isn't something to be afraid of. Conflict is something to be curious about. It can tell us a little something more about what we need. It can tell us a little bit something about what another person needs, and it can also tell us a little bit something more about where we want to grow into. And so I would just, I'd honor the fact with folks that if they're feeling like, you know, there's something here that I want to be able to talk about with somebody that I care about, whatever that relationship looks like, it's never too early.
Chelsea Cleary, thank you so much for not only coming on to Buzz for Good, but for being a Buzz for Good in our community. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for today's Buzz for Good. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please stay connected with us throughout the week on my website, buzzforgood.com. That's buzz, B-U-Z-Z, 4, good.com. And social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok, all at Buzz for Good. I hope you continue being a Buzz for Good in the community you hold dear, and supporting those nonprofit organizations that work tirelessly each and every day to make your community an even better place to live. Bye now.